never showing mercy to the guilty, I think, is probably a good idea. And something happened recently. I've got this all in my head. And it's the Moscow terror attack. Not the first of its kind, won't be the last of its kind. For people who missed it, some Islamists turned up, set fire to a mall, and shot a bunch of innocent people because questions yet to be solved. But ISIS claimed responsibility, and that's the end of it. Most people online, in response to this, in the Anglosphere, in Russia, it's a different case, but in the Anglosphere, I saw people just arguing about who did it for some reason. And I was just like, I'm not interested in this. This is boring.
Do you know who did it?
Well, ISIS claim responsibility and have been operating in Russia for about 10 years now.
Okay.
And have done something similar before. So,
what's ISIS's beef with Russia?
The South, because there's Muslim republics that are controlled by the Russian Federation, not just Chechnya, Dagestan as well, Ingushetia. And those republics want independence. They're Muslim.
Right.
And therefore, well, I'm not saying they want independence. The Islamists want them independent Islamic states there. And the Russian Federation doesn't agree.
Okay.
That's the fight. So that's that. But as I said, most people are arguing about, oh, who did it? Maybe it's, I don't know, the Jews or something. It's just, oh my God, okay, yes, the internet. But that's not what I'm talking about today. I'm talking about something much more interesting, I think, because I saw in a response to this attack, this kept getting put, this statement here. So this is just some rando who did it. And they quote here, Dostoevsky saying, a society should be judged not on how it treats its outstanding citizens, but how it treats its criminals. And it's a picture.
Weirdly ties into what I've just covered and what I'm about to cover after this as well.
So this picture here is a fellow who's had his ear cut because he was one of the terrorists and they caught him and got the knife and went, oh, you're going to tell us all you know, or we're going to knife you. And they knifed him. So there you are. That's what that happened. But that statement there, the idea that you should trust or judge a society on how it treats criminals, that's bollocks. Well, I'm sorry. I can't think of anything more insane than the logical conclusion of that statement.
Hang on. No. I'm actually, I'm not, I actually do think you should judge it by how it treats its outstanding citizens as well. But I do agree that you should judge it by how it treats its criminals. But I'm not saying you should go on the pro-liberal side of that argument.
That's what I'm saying is bollocks.
Yeah.
The idea that you must treat criminals as, from this perspective, this person and others like them, are saying you should treat criminals like they're heroes. And then you would be an outstanding society. Yeah. It's like, no, you should judge it on a different metric as you're getting to. But this quote, it's attributed to this book by Dostoevsky. What is it? The House of the Dead. In case you're wondering, it's not in there.
It's not.
It's just a lie. So I don't know what that's about.
It just sounds like something Dostoevsky would say.
So apparently there's plenty of other sources of that quote. So that's the big argument about it. But it's not in the book. I did a Control F. I mean, if someone can prove me wrong, go for it. But there we are. But there is a much more interesting quote, which was on my mind. And you mentioned it this morning.
Ah, yes.
Adam Smith.
Yeah.
This is a rant he once wrote.
No, it's not. It's an insanely long and boring treatise on how we have, literally moral sentiments, as he says.
Yeah, it's sort of a rant, though.
It's like, it's really dull.
The parts I were reading, but that's the thing. It's like a rant for the 1790s. So the quote from him that gets shared a lot is...
It's not good. It's just really dull.
Yeah, like many old writings. Here, the quote from him is, mercy to the guilty is cruelty to the innocent.
Okay.
And this is very famous. So I went and found it in here, and it is in there. And I thought I'd just read the context, because like most of these things, there's usually actually a bit more to it. I've cut some stuff out, because as you mentioned, it's a bit boring and long. So I've taken out the relevant parts. So he says, when the guilty is about to suffer that just retaliation, humbled by the terror of his approaching punishment, when he ceases to be an object of fear, he begins to be an object of pity. The thought of what he is about to suffer extinguishes their resentment for the sufferings of others which he has given occasion. They are disposed to pardon and forgive him. Here, therefore, they have occasion to call to their assistance the consideration of the general interest of society. They must reflect that mercy to the guilty is cruelty to the innocent. He's talking of men in general. That men, if you're a proper man, you care about injustice. And so you might, upon looking at some suspect in a case who's just been found guilty and is definitely guilty and is about to be very cruelly punished, have some pity for him. But his advice being, he's actually talking about capital punishment here. No. Like, you are being cruel to the people who have been wronged by this man. If you're like, well, won't you think about his feelings? The torture he must go through now? And this is the sentiment I got from some people online towards those guys doing the terrorist attacks in Moscow. And this isn't about Russia-Ukraine relations or anything like that. Please argue somewhere else about this. This is about just how to deal with terrorism and the response. And I think as a state, if nothing else, there's a number of different cultural responses you can have to events like this. And we have one in this country, our state. They have a very particular response, which we all remember. I suppose I'll play a little bit, shall we? The state PSYOP in response to the Manchester Arena bombing. Singing Don't Look Back in Anger. It's not very loud, but we'll have to take my word for it. That's what they're singing here. The point being, it's there. Was cringe. Not the right move. Foreigner murders a bunch of children. Don't look back in anger. Okay. And then in Nottingham, you may remember this speech, which was a mess.
This evil person is just that. He is just a person. Please hold no hate that relates to any colour, sex, or religion.
Right.
That's the thing I'm thinking when someone blows up my children.
But why? Because there's a bit more to that. This event really crystallized something for me. That's really weird.
Well, what she's doing there is saying, look, I know this has been bad, but we want to preserve the sanctity of liberal values. So don't be a racist. Don't be religionist. So that's what she's appealing to.
But why? Because liberal values, what she's proposing there, that you can't dare be a racist if you think that maybe we shouldn't import, Muslim terrorists, is the position of our state. That is the state position of the United Kingdom.
Mm-hmm.
It's cringe, but that's our problem, is that this is all backed up by tax money, effectively.
Yeah.
And the suspects in these instances were basically helped by the state to either get into this country. I mean, in the Manchester Arena case, we paid for the bomb with our taxes. And the reason
he was allowed to get into the arena is because the security guard didn't want to be a racist.
And because of that culture produced by the state, there's this complete show of a society, and things like that happen. So what's the response? Well, okay, if you're the state, I mean, you could adjust, you could reform, make sure this doesn't happen again. But our state refuses to change. And so the outrage over the injustice that's taken place there shifts to the community at large. This is how MI5 see it, for example. We've been over this. This is why this lady had to give this speech about racism. Because the state apparatus is afraid that because we can't point to the criminals, and in this case, much of that is the state's doing, and the state refuses to change and therefore have some kind of vent on the built-up distrust, it moves over to the community at large here. And the state knows that. I mean, that's why all their messaging is, don't blame the BAME race, which...
No one was, but okay.
Yeah.
Hi folks, sorry to interrupt the video, but I wanted to let you know that we've introduced a feature on the website that allows you to purchase individual videos. So if you go over to lotus.com and see a piece of premium content that you really want to watch, you can pay for it, and it is yours forever.
So let's pop on back to Russia, because of course Russia is another extreme. Here is a picture of them tying electrodes to this man's testicles, because he was one of the people who took part in the massacre, and once they caught him, they wanted information, and they weren't willing to wait. So they just tied him up and did that. And as you can see, some people were a bit like, Jesus Christ, that's a thing. The guy who got stabbed, the style of knife that was stabbed on his ear there, that instantly sold out on the Russian version of Amazon.
Wow.
Every possible version of the knife is just sold out.
So the Russians are looking back in anger.
But it's a cultural thing there. The Russian population decided to en masse buy those knives after seeing them being used by the FSB to torture a suspect in a terror case. That doesn't really happen here. That's interesting. That's a proper cultural difference, is what I'm getting at.
Their response is to be prepared and to protect themselves. Our response is to turn our back and give them somewhere else to stab.
Yes.
But of the population, what kind of population buys a knife after seeing that happen? What's a population that isn't squeamish about these things? I remember that someone sent me an article. It's a brilliant article. I mean, there are many good things about Russia. There are many bad things. And so one of the bad things that were listed there is actually quite, I suppose, debatable. There were some Uzbeks who came to a town in Russia, and there was an eternal flame. You'll find them in every city and town in Russia for World War II. And it's powered by gas, and it costs nothing because it's Russia. Now, these Uzbeks, for some reason, decided they would put it out with the snow, and it was captured on CCTV. And all of the comments are just average Russians, and the average Russian response to something like that is kill them. Like, just, horrific things should be done to these people for the disrespect they have shown. That's a proper cultural difference.
Yes.
It's a kind of brutality that you don't... you occasionally get it in this country, in the comments, but not that not that sharp.
You've never read Nietzsche, have you?
I haven't, no.
No, this is Nietzsche's society that refuses to accept its own parasites, and so it has a willed power of its own, and believes that the proper purpose of justice is society's revenge against the wrongdoer.
Well, how does this manifest in the different places? Because that is essentially getting back to Adam Smith's point there, which is that you have to actually have some kind of vent for this.
Yes.
And in Russia, well, I mean, they took the suspects and put them all on trial, cameras in the room immediately, traditional Russian courtroom here where they shove you in a little box. But you can see they've not been treated well. This chap still has a plastic bag around his neck. A lot of people speculating whether or not he was strangled with that, which the Russians are happy to not deny, which because no one cares. Literally, if you did that to him, no one in Russia cares.
Well, they're not liberals. So they think that the people who did commit a terrible crime deserve the Nietzschean view of punishment. Society must have their revenge and show them suffering as they've made society suffer.
I'm going to use this account here, Lord Bebo. He's a bit of a Russian shill, which is, that's him. He's allowed to do that. That's his opinion. But I don't know if he's from Moscow or not, but he does actually give us an accurate representation here of how the Russians have been responding to this from what I've seen. Mm-hmm. So if you go to his tweets, I mean, they're celebrating that these people have suffered. I mean, the several images here. I mean, one of them was unconscious in the courtroom and still pled guilty, which, And as you can see, they've been beaten up. But after murdering a bunch of innocent people in a mall,
So Adam Smith's point about when they're no longer dangerous, they seem pitiful.
You can see it here in real time. I just find this fascinating. I mean, I don't know if I'm making sense. I just hope I am.
Yeah.
There's
somewhere in between. I mean, I'm not up for seeing people suffer, but I do think the swift punishment is just. And if people commit terrorist attacks, then sure, death penalty. But the between the punishment and the judgment, I don't believe in making any man suffer.
There's two proper extremes here. That's what I'm trying to lay out. In the specific Russian case, I mean, they're not really that. They want to know more, so they just decide to beat the crap out of them to get more information. So that's that reasoning there, at least what I would imagine they would say, just to make that context. They also decided to just start rounding up family members because you were probably involved.
Yeah.
I mean, come on, that is just usually true.
Well, they're not liberals. They believe in collective punishment.
No, in Russia. They do have individual justice in that
they deported that entire family of Uzbeks who put out the sacred flame.
I didn't say this.
I remember that story.
Oh, okay.
They deported his entire family.
Probably because they're actually...
I'm not saying they're not, but the point is some teenager did something stupid, you're all gone.
They're probably on visas if they're Uzbeks as well.
Just a lot to learn. That's all I'm saying.
But this case, I mean, they will actually most likely try this guy, and if he's found guilty of something, I'm not saying Russian justice is exactly like the cleanest or anything, but they will actually deal with people directly. And in this country, you may remember with the Manchester Arena bomber, I think we got like his brother, but the rest of the family were already in Libya, fighting with ISIS, weirdly enough. Glad we had them over for tea. They also just rounded up taxi drivers who may have helped them, because why not? Okay, that's a thing. And then I'll just end this off with a statement from the former president. This is a guy called Medvedev.
Yep.
He's a bit of a meme in Russia because he used to be the president and the prime minister, so he's not a nobody or anything.
He was obviously keeping the seat warm for Putin.
But he does this weird thing where he just kind of schizo posts, and everyone in Russia kind of loves it because it's like Trump, where he tries out the silly tweets, but it's Russian, so it's a bit different. I mean, this is his response to this, for example, which is stern, if nothing else. He says, "To the families of those killed in the terror attack, sincere condolences and sincere strength to all the loved ones and victims. Terrorists only understand retaliatory terror."
Yeah.
That's a hell of an opening line.
That's a true statement.
"No trials or investigations will help if force is not countered by force, and deaths by total execution of terrorists and repressions against their families will experience." He writes at the end there. He then goes on to talk about he blaming Kiev there. But,
sure, he's bound to.
Russian politician, what do you expect? Yeah. But then he ended off with death for death. My point being, I mean, there's just the cultural difference there is huge. I mean, these are definitely two extremes. And I think that's what I'm trying to get at.
It's not even that extreme. I mean, go back 100 years and that would have been the British opinion.
Exactly. Something has changed on our side. We didn't used to say, don't look back in anger.
We became liberals.
To mass murder.
After World War II, we became a very liberal state.
So, I mean, again, Russia.
I think we would have supported capital punishment, but would we have supported guilt by association?
I think the average person would have done.
I think it's very dependent on what we're dealing with.
Because I struggle
in the
with that.
modern world.
I don't like the idea of guilt by association of being found guilty for something you haven't done.
Sure.
But I also like the idea of being able to swiftly deal with problems like this.
But
And say, well, you're all gone.
Until 1964, we did have the death penalty for murder.
Yeah.
And we did have guilt by association as well. For example, if I've actually not long just finished reading a book about the death penalty in England, and the reason that criminals would Pete Hitchens has made this point, they'd pat each other down before going on a sting or whatever, because if one of them was carrying a gun and they shot someone and killed someone during the crime, all of the criminals involved would be hanged,
Right.
which I think is just a fantastic policy that we should bring back.
But then they're all criminals, so that's fair.
Yeah.
To be clear,
Their family members wouldn't be.
but they didn't. Yeah, sure. I'm not saying we should.
guilt by association isn't actually Russian criminal justice policy.
It's just something that happens.
It's just that they've arrested him.
Okay.
They haven't actually said you're going to prison forever.
Right.
But the sentiment death for death was the policy of the British state until 1964, when Labour repealed.
Just 60 years. Well,
Yeah, Labour repealed the death penalty against the majority will of the population, even till this day. Incidentally, still now more than half the people in this country think we should have the death penalty for
Yeah,
people who murder.
Yeah.
And that's always what it was used for. So
that was my point, which is that there needs to be, well, basically no mercy for the guilty. I mean, these guys were literally caught after the event happened. They're them. They're definitely them. It's not a confusion.
just a quick thing: are the Russians not going to execute these people?
Potentially. They'll have a fair trial first.
Oh, will they?
Yes.
Oh, good. I'm so glad I'm getting a fair trial in Russia.
Of course. I mean, it's not exactly.
I don't believe that.
In case you're wondering, I am joking. So let's move on. Let's end this off on something, though, because I saw a lot of people talking about this. This is someone online saying that Russia has started mass deportations of migrants after the terrorist attack.
Yeah, they're taking the Pakistan approach.
Well, that's what Pakistan does. I wrote to my friends in Russia and asking them, so what's the deal on this? And no, this isn't happening according to them.
Oh.
So this is, I don't know what this footage is meant to represent. Maybe it's just foreign criminals. Maybe it's people being conscripted.
No, we're weak liberals as well.
Yeah, they decided in the middle of the war to start conscripting illegals, which there's
Really?
their way of dealing with it, which that's a policy. Yeah. But my point to be, I mean, yeah, there's crime statistics and all that, and I'm not throwing those policies out. I'm just sidelining them for the moment, which is that dealing with criminals as they are and dealing with them swiftly like that, I think that there's a proper tangible difference to the societal impact of the terrorism there. From a counterterrorism perspective, what are you meant to do in response to terrorism? We are meant to do a couple of things, which is deal with any future attacks, minimize those, and then deal with the effect that's going to have on society. The purpose of terrorism is political. It's not just for jolly good fun.
Yeah.
Like, there's actually a goal in mind. And the impact in Britain, the way we've dealt with it, is to suppress it. And in Russia, what they've done over this specific attack is to make a big song and dance about how we got the guys, we tortured them on camera, they will be dealt with.
Yeah.
That's the message to the society at large. And that, okay, I mean, it's extreme, don't get me wrong, but
It's quite Trump as well.
yeah, it's also very Russian, to be honest. And frankly, in a Russian context, this sort of fixes the issue.
They died like dogs.
Yeah. Because being in Russia, it's kind of weird. I need to go to Chechnya proper, but every Muslim I met and every Christian in the south who's near the Muslim regions, they actually have very good relations. I mean, how I described our relations with the Muslim communities in our country is completely foreign to them. The level of distrust we have, they don't understand. The level of religious fundamentalism in this country doesn't exist in Russia.
Wow.
It's been dealt with. It's just,
It's been dealt with.
it has been dealt with. And that's been dealt with in Russian ways, but my
Yeah.
point being, there's not this level of problem. And I think a large reason we have this problem in this country, the huge amount of distrust in this country between the communities, is because there's no ability to actually deal with the injustice that's been caused. I mean, the injustice of the Manchester Arena bombing, as pointed out there, the blame goes on to the state because they were the one who brought that family in, gave them money, and then they bombed children. Okay?
Yeah.
And then the family are not, oh God, we can't believe what our son did. No, they're back in Libya fighting with ISIS, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so the blame goes to the state, and the state refuses to reform, doesn't make a show of how we're going to deal with it, and instead says, you should shut up. Right, what does that do? In my mind, that moves it on to the community at large. Massive distrust now between the English and the Muslims in the country.
It's all behavior management. You know, as a teacher, I saw this in schools. If you have a Muslim kid bullying a white kid, people are treat them differently, don't want to be seen as racists, and so they don't actually quash the bullying. There's no punishment, so it festers under the surface, and kids know that they can get away with bullying, and so the bullying increases in the school. But the school doesn't want to be seen as a school where kids are bullied, so they publicly talk about how bullying is wrong, but never actually address the issue. Whereas in schools where you say, no, you bullied, you're out, doesn't matter what race, religion you are, you're gone, then it quashes the problem. Like, you have to address it and deal with it.
You have to deal with a firm hand.
Yes.
What I think you're getting at here, Callum, is the lack of catharsis that comes after a terror attack in Britain. Because normally this is understood that, again, I think that subconsciously there is this kind of pagan sort of Nietzschean reality to these events. There is an understanding that, no, the terror attack was because it's an anonymous thing. It's not an attack against a military structure or a particular group of people for a particular reason. No, any mass shooting, any terror attack is an attack on society at large. It could be anyone in there. So it's a representative of you when you're wandering around in society, just doing whatever you do. And so it is understandable, perfectly natural for the average person to want to see the state, which is supposed to be empowered for the protection of your rights, to take action, severe action, in the Russian case, against the person who attacks society itself. And again, it definitely comes down to the Nietzschean perspective of, well, the liberal state is prepared to just carry the parasites, whereas as a normal, healthy state would allow the flow of catharsis to go into the person by literally hanging them from a tree. And in Britain, what we used to do is put a sign underneath. This is why these people have been hanged.
Yeah.
Like these people have been hanged because they murdered their children, or because
the deterrence.
But not just the deterrent. Obviously, it is a fantastic
reaction as well.
Yeah, but it's a way of reassuring the society that the world is ordered as it ought to be. These people will get their comeuppance, death for death. And that's the justice.
There's also an underlying aspect there that feeds into the counterterrorism strategy, which is that these people were rare. These people were something that had to be dealt with. They don't represent the community.
Oh, they need to be an example. Yeah.
So in Russia, I mean, again, maybe I've got some biased experience, but from what I had in the South, they don't have the same problems we do. There's a lot going on there, don't get me wrong. But the underlying aspect of
it's not a land of milk and honey. It has problems.
Yeah, some people
videos say otherwise. It's like a utopia.
Leave Moscow. But the underlying aspect there of their extreme, we will deal with them, and that doesn't represent the community. Whereas in our case, it now becomes something that, well, you can't criticize the community, which is what led to the Manchester bombing. And a specific example of the security guard who didn't stop him because he didn't want to be seen as, quote, racist. In which case, you've now actually, because of the cultural impact of your response, increased the likelihood of terrorism and also caused massive distrust within British society.
Yes.
Oh, fantastic counterterrorism strategy, boys. Another good day. I'm sorry, but that is just stupid.
This is the liberal counterterrorism strategy. We have a liberal order which abhors any kind of collective judgments because they're racist or sexist or whatever it is. And so without the ability to narrow the judgment onto the individual by, say, hanging them, the judgment, as you say, it resides within the community. And so the community has a moral debt that hasn't been paid, and people can see it. And yet the state is refusing to accept it because, no, we're liberals. We have no sort of understanding of group interactions. Everything is just the individual on their own. And so that's not the case. As you see, his family's out fighting for ISIS in Libya. That's not the case. We know it's not the case, but we can't channel the negative energy onto the person who deserves it.
You know what? That's biblical.
It's true.
Original sin, right? And man took on this moral debt that could not be repaid, and Christ had to die for our sins so that price was paid. That we need a sacrifice. We need a price to be paid.
Yeah.
Otherwise, we can't move on.
And normally the person who's committed the terror attack would have been that sacrifice.
Right.
Like, we'd see them hanging, and everyone would go, that's what we do.
And even in the case of the suicide bombing in Manchester, turned out his brother was helping him. And then there's the family who were fighting for ISIS, which you could have just rounded up.
Yeah.
Well, I don't like much about Pakistan, but I do like their policy of just deporting the migrants. Your community is not engaging with ours properly.
Every Afghan has to go.
What was it, like 4 terror attacks from the Afghans in Pakistan, and 1.7 million Afghans were deported?
Right. Yes.
Mad.
That's the Pakistani worldview.
Yeah.
My point being, I think maybe I've made sense, maybe I haven't.
Yeah.
But there's a proper problem here, and the Moscow terror attack and the response to it, it's a different world, but it really showed to me, at least, that the UK is just really, really broken on every level when it comes to this issue. If you appreciated that episode from the podcast of the Lotus Eaters, you can go to lotuseaters.com to get access to all the premium content that's on the site, such as the premium videos, this one on the career of Stanley Kubrick. If you'd like to find out what else is being put out, you can follow on Twitter at lotuseaters_com on Twitter. Thank you and goodbye.